Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. Thank you so much for being with us today as we embark on, it's something that I have been dealing with for 22 years, ladies and gentlemen. You've heard me talk about it over the last 15 years. And that is a small little book that I've been working on. It is something that seems kind of odd to me that it's taking this long, but then again, life tends to get in the way. Well, today we're going to find out how to create your first novel. This is the title of the book by our guest, Hank Quense, and he's joining us. He's not only an award-winning author, he's rather prolific with over 30 books under his belt, as it were. And Hank, it's great to have you with us to help demystify this unbelievable process that is now more in the hands of the individual who is actually writing than it once was when you'd write it and then you'd turn the manuscript over to a publishing company.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Richard. Yeah, it's in the last, I'd say 15 years, the publishing industry has changed quite a lot.
It has indeed, and maybe even to the consternation of the publishing industry, because
Yes.
I have a feeling that a lot of these different institutionalized industries that are private businesses and so forth, over the decades, some of them actually have been sort of drummed out of business because we can now do a lot of the stuff that they did, and sometimes even better, without the constraints of, I don't know, CEOs and supervisors and all that kind of stuff. And that is not to say that they haven't played their role. They haven't had an important aspect there.
Yes.
I often question, it's like a curiosity of mine, and that is, who decided that that was going to be the cover to that book, or that was going to be the logo for that company, or who approved that advertisement for that particular product or service? They must have been on drugs or something, because that's the stupidest thing I've ever seen or heard or read.
Yeah.
Whereas now you get to decide, I get to decide.
That's
But
true.
but there are some parameters that we have to consider, and that's kind of why we're here talking with you, especially about your latest book, Create Your First Novel. It is a comprehensive guide that basically is spanning the entire long-term process from planning through marketing and starting your author business. Now, I think the first step for me is, okay, look, I just want to write, Hank. I don't want to know about all of this other stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing you can't do that these days. You've got
Oh,
to dive into all of these different elements.
well, what you're saying is the way most writers thought. They're going to write a book, and they write the book, and that's all they worry about. That's all they do. But and this was me when I first started about 20 years ago. Um, I wrote a book. I didn't think about anything else. But what my book tells people is that starting to write a book is a commitment to a long-term, multi-phase project. There's actually 5 different phases involved in it. You got to plan the book, you got to write the book, you got to publish the book, you got to market the book, and ta-da, you got a business. And all of this stuff has to be considered. Now, the purpose of the book is to tell these authors that this is what's going to happen. It's not a surprise. I published my first book. This was all a surprise. I got it published, and I got to market this. What are you kidding me? I get 1099 forms, about taxes, and that's when I realized I have a business. That was quite a while ago, and I've run into in write groups that I belong to. I've seen authors create a novel or a memoir, and they struggle with all of this stuff. So I decided to write a book and lay it all out, and that's what I did.
Absolutely. And it's to me quite extraordinary, the process that one must go through, I mean, I've been in the broadcast industry for over 44 years. And when I first got into it, I was told you need to learn as much as you can about every department that you can. And then somewhere down the road, 5 or 10 years down the road, you can specialize if you want. You want to go into sports, or you want
Yeah,
to go into advertising, or you want to do voice work, or you want to be a DJ, and so on and so on and so forth. All of the different, or an engineer for that matter. Uh, but the problem that I see with my industry, as opposed to with book writing, is that there are certain rules in publishing, in writing a book and then getting it published and going through again all of these different steps, which we will go through to help people work through this. And by the way, creating your first novel is sort of a workbook, isn't it? It's something for people that to process through, maybe even as they are writing their story, their novel,
yeah,
fiction, nonfiction, science fiction, and so forth.
yeah, it is because it says first novel, so there is a fiction workshop in there with a whole bunch of lessons, and just in case people really aren't familiar with how to go about creating fiction and writing fiction. So I threw that in there, and I go through all the steps. I tell people about publishing, go through a lot of information on publishing and marketing. Well, that's just a swamp. No one understands that. And I do the best to help, what I can. But
Yeah.
that's a surprise by itself. I often say that book marketing is like going across the vast swamp in a leaky canoe without an oar, without a map, and all these alligators are starting to gather around. And the alligators are the scam artists. And my book is trying to say this is how you get a map and an oar and get through this morass.
Exactly. Let's start from step one. Now, certainly, as I said earlier, I've been working on the same book, and it's nonfiction. It's more along the lines of self-help. It's not
Uh-huh.
a big book. And I've been working on it for 21 years, 22 years actually, 22 years. Only because of, life gets in the way and this and that and the other thing. And I've got a fair amount of it all squared away, but I'm still reading through it when I get a chance to try to proof it. Now, obviously, I need somebody else to actually proofread it because I'm the one that wrote it, and it's one of those things, can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah, sure.
Um, matter of fact, about 10 years ago, I actually did send a copy to my sister, PDF, to proof it because she's an excellent proofreader.
Uh-huh.
And this kind of goes to the actual writing of the book itself. And that is that when she sent it back to me, I had this one section where there was a list of things. And I learned that you put a comma after each of the items in the list until the last one, and then you put an and between the second to last and last item.
Yes.
But she removed all the commas and put in and. And I almost called her to say, what the heck do you think you're doing? And then I did some research and found out that both ways are acceptable. One of them is a little more redundant with all of those ands,
Yeah.
but both ways are acceptable. So is that something that the writer needs to be concerned about initially, or should they just say, forget about all the grammar rules and all of the kind of stuff? We'll fix that later. Get the story down.
That is true. That is, you have to get the story down for the first draft. First draft. Then you start in with the editing and rewriting and polishing it and putting in the grammar rules and following the grammar rules. The less you follow the grammar rules, the more you're going to pay up for editing. Someone's going to do it. You
Yeah.
do it, or the editor does it, and editors charge. They'll charge based on a writing sample. And if your writing sample doesn't have to follow any of the grammar rules, you're going to get a nice, awful big bill. So
Yeah.
the more grammar rules you follow, the easier it will be for the editor. And the less you'll charge.
One of the issues that I have had, and this is primarily with TV and movies, is one of the rules when it comes to people's names. And specifically, and I worked for a Christian radio station for 15 years back in the 80s and 90s during the heydays of televangelism.
Uh-huh.
And it drove me crazy when they would say Jesus's. They would put another S on the end. It's like, no, that is grammatically incorrect.
Right.
And yet people continue to do that. If somebody's name ends in an S, they add another one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I hear this in some of the shorts videos that I watch on YouTube, for example. And I'm going, what is wrong with you people? Did you not go to school? And of course, a lot of people say, well, the education system in America is, crap. And, we didn't learn that stuff. And I'm thinking, wow, you mean to tell me my generation was the last one that got this info? Come on.
Yeah.
Talk to us about really from your perspective, from creating your first novel, the first step in this process. Once you have decided you're going to write the book, which I guess actually might be the first step, but once you've decided, I have this idea for a story, and it kind of goes like this: once upon a time, blah, 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 the end. You
Yeah.
want to plan it out? How do you go about the process of planning out if you haven't really, and again, talk to us about this process when you just came up with the idea. Oh, what a neat thing. I think I'll, write this story.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. Uh, Writing a book, any book, but especially with fiction, it depends upon need ideas. This is actually you're actually creating something. The way an artist creates a painting, you're creating a book. Same way you need ideas. Ideas are what builds the book. For a novel, you need hundreds of ideas. You need ideas about characters, how the characters develop, how they live. You need ideas about the plot events. You need ideas about scenes, and setting and all this stuff, you need all these ideas. And this is part of the planning. You just write down all these ideas for a while, and then you start to build the book by what I call story design. You start to develop the characters. You develop a plot. This is the story design is where you take all these ideas and embed them into the story elements, such as the characters and development, and the plots and scenes and all of that. Then when you get to that, then you can start writing the first draft. That's the way I do it anyway. I know people just start writing and they usually suddenly come to an end. They write 3 scenes and said, what happened to this great idea I had? The problem is that they don't know where the ending is. And if you don't know where the ending is, you really can't write the story because you take the reader on a journey from the beginning to the end. If you don't know where the end is, you can't write the journey. One of the initial steps, a very important step, is to get the ending before you start writing. End of the lecture.
Yeah. The butler did it.
Yeah.
That's my ending. The butler did it.
Yeah.
I have read, now in my case, I've read many self-help books that were actually written as novels. They wanted to tell a narrative, a story that incorporated these kinds of elements. And the one in particular that I think of is, of course, James Redfield and his Celestine Prophecy, where it was a novel, but it was a novel that incorporated these different insights and so forth. Is that something that is essential not so much in terms of self-help, in terms of writing a novel per se, but in terms of is it really necessary in a novel that we have any kind of Oh, what do I want to, what word do I want to use?
Like,
Metaphors. And I'm thinking, for some reason, I'm thinking of Aesop's fables, and I can't remember how they're referred to. The moral of this story. Is that something that can or does, how important is something like that in to be incorporated?
that's something the author has to figure out for himself.
Okay.
I don't put morals into my book, but equally important is that the main character has a character arc,
Hmm.
over the course of the story. He starts from one place, maybe he's a bigot, and he ends up in the story, he's not so bigoted. That's what he learned over the course of the story, and that is very essential. That could be a moral also. That could be some moralizing can occur during this character arc, but
Mm.
whether it's a moral or it's not a moral is the important thing is there has to be a character arc, and that's up to the author on how he wants to develop that character arc.
Do you think that the majority of people have these kinds of stories that they need to get out, and they just don't know how, or is there fear based? Is there fear that is keeping them from doing this, because not just because they don't know how or they don't know how to start, but maybe there's a certain level of dealing with the whole issue of approval. There are critics out there that are going to tear you apart, and then there are critics that are going to, they're going to praise the work that you do.
Yeah,
Um,
I think fear is a big issue with the people when they start a novel or they're thinking about writing a book. Fear. There's two kinds of fear that are really involved. One is the fear of rejection. That they write to spend a year writing this thing and they show it to people and people are like, yeah, they don't like it. They reject it.
yeah.
Well, rejection is part of the writing process. I know a woman who's successfully published. She is in a club with several other women, and once a month they get together and compare notes on how many rejections they got that month. The one who has the most rejections gets a bottle of wine from the losers.
Oh my heavens.
It's something that if you're writing, you're getting rejected. So you got to learn to live with that fear.
Yeah.
The other fear is that sooner or later you're going to realize that what someone will tell you, this isn't very original. This has been done dozens of times.
Hmm.
That is true. Well, no, it hasn't been done dozens of times. It's been done hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times. But your version has never been seen. You have a special way of writing about this theme, whatever it is. And so yours is different than the other thousands of copies of the story. Yours
Hmm.
is different. Keep writing it. Ignore the people who say it's not original because it is original.
Hank Quense is my guest. Creating your first novel is our conversation piece, if you will, and you are listening to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and this is educational and insightful for me, especially. One of the things that I loved when I was in high school, I took Southwest literature class. One of my favorite teachers was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Miller. I don't think I ever learned his first name. But we were doing some creative writing, and I wrote this short story that he said I should elaborate on. The title was Conflagration at Sea. It had to do with writers, authors, and it had to do with this elderly author who competed in this same annual competition. And there was a young kid of maybe 19 or 20 who, for the first time, was competing. And this older guy, the elderly gentleman, lost again for maybe the 15th or 16th time. And he was livid. Well, they were going to hold a party for the winner, the young kid, on a yacht out on the ocean.
Mhm.
And so they're out there on the ocean. It's evening, if you will. The elderly gentleman gets this rubber raft. He's got explosives that he wraps around the yacht, And then he gets back into the raft and rows away, and then he sets it off. Unfortunately, he was still too close, and the shards from the explosion punctured the raft. And with all of the dead bodies, the sharks came
Mhm.
and he died. Now, here's the irony: the story that he submitted that he lost on the 15th try was that story.
Ah, he lived his own story.
He lived his own story. One of the other ways that I would write short stories, because I was also taking photography class, this was in college, and I would put on a mat board a picture that I had taken, whether it was something I created under the enlarger when I'm processing and so forth. And I would look at it going, there's a story there. And then I would turn it over, put a piece of lined paper on it, and I would write a short little story
Uh,
about that picture.
yeah.
What is your muse?
I have no idea.
Is there anything that you look to, or something that inspires you to pursue another novel, another story that you want to
I,
share with the world?
uh, I just, if I want to write a story, I just stop thinking, just lay back and let my mind swirl, and eventually it'll come up with a character. I get a character and I write sci-fi and fantasy, so the character most often is a little weird,
Mm-hmm.
like a dwarf or an alien or something. Then I got someone I think look a good character, and I give them a plot problem, a big problem, and that's it. I'm
Mm.
off. I
And
got a,
you're
I got a problem. Go solve the problem, and that's how I do it. That's the genesis of the story.
now, there are two books that I can think of that have incredible detail, socially, religiously, politically, etc. One of them is Frank Herbert's Dune.
Mhm.
I've read it, in addition to seeing some of the different movies made, and I was so intrigued by the detail and the depth into all of the different aspects.
Yeah,
I know that it's subject to the author's whims as to how deep they go.
yeah.
Do you find that the more detail you can put in that regard, do you think that that holds the reader, or does it maybe bog some down? I guess, and again, I know every reader's different, as is every author. What are your
It's
thoughts in that regard?
well, my books aren't that deep. I don't go into that much detail. It's the way you handle it that's important. If you have like what's called in writing an info dump, where you stop the story and you have 5 pages of details, about why Mount Everest is so high on how it came to be about that thing, you lose the reader.
Hmm.
They'll just start skipping past the pages, or they'll go out and mow the lawn. Uh, you got to be careful with the info dumps. There's a certain amount of information that the reader has to have in order to understand the story.
Hmm.
And then there's a lot of information that the author develops and he thinks the reader needs, but doesn't. It's his world. He built his world. I want to tell you about my world. And the reader says, please don't tell me about your world. Just tell me enough so that I can understand the story. And
Hmm.
that's a very critical item about this. If you do carried away with your world building, you can sink the book.
Yeah. I know too, the other book that I was thinking of was Stranger in a Strange Land, which took me years to read because I had to wait for it to come out in Audible, and I loved reading it over and over again, the different sections. I didn't like the way it ended myself, but that's the way the author chose to end it. I get it.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating. Um, what is your perspective with the boon in recorded books? Now, I'll let you know also that as a kid growing up, I was legally blind and I was listening to Audible books, but they weren't called that. They were called
Yeah.
recordings for the blind and
Mhm.
talking books for the blind.
Yeah.
And that's where I read, I finally was allowed to read The Godfather when I was 16. They would not let me read it before then. And of course, my metaphysical primer, Autobiography of a Yogi. But what's your thought in that regard? If someone is writing a book, should they even be thinking about that or just stay focused on their story?
Worry about the story, not about how it's going to get published. Later on, oh, you gotta get it published first, really, before you get to the audio books. That's the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And, you get ebooks, you got paperbacks, you got hardcovers, and audiobooks. It's just another
Yeah.
edition of the book these days. Way back when, it probably was a big deal, but it's not a big deal anymore. It's just part of the publication process.
Yeah.
In many cases, it's automatic.
Yeah. A sidebar here. Are any of your books audible?
One is Falstaff's Big Gamble is an audio book. I I made an audio book out of it with I hired a voice editor, a voice actor to do this thing. He was quite successful, but I did it because I heard this is the next big thing. Audio books are going to explode. So I made an audio book. I think I
Mhm.
sold 7 copies in about 5 years. So you can't prove that it's a big deal to me. I didn't do it again because it is, if you're self-publishing, it is very expensive to do.
Yeah.
You got to pay for the voice actor, they got to eat too.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think that the printed book, the one that you hold in your hand, is on its way out, or will it be with us kind of like vinyl records that are coming back again?
No, I don't think it's going anywhere. I think there'll always be printed books or, digital books anyway.
Hmm.
I think there will be digital and audio books eventually, but I don't see digital books or print books going away. I
Yeah.
don't read, I don't use audio books. I read. I love to read. I read
Yeah.
all of it. If I wasn't here, I'd be reading.
Okay. Well, we won't keep you too long. You probably want to get back to whatever it is that you're involved in. Hank Quense is my guest, and it is creating your first novel. I want to give you folks a website to go to, and it is writersarc.com. What's the ARC stand for?
Um, it's Writers and Authors Resource Center.
Ah, okay. Writers, blah, 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 writers, arc.com. That's
Yeah.
the website. We'll be linked to that website. And of course, Hank is also on Facebook and Twitter and all other places that you can think of. I want to, as we continue here talking with Hank here on Tell Me Your Story, I'm Richard Dugan, and I'd like to jump into the basic steps that one needs to go through. I'm just going to let you take that and share with us from the beginning to the end. And you've mentioned certain elements already, but
Yeah.
let's start from square one, from ground zero, so to speak.
Okay. So if you want to create a book, there is a number of steps or rather phases that it has to go through. There's actually 5 of them that I can identify. The first is you got to plan the book. You got to come up with an idea. You got to figure out what you're going to write. There's a fiction, not novels and nonfiction books essentially have a different planning process. Fiction is you've got to collect all these ideas about stuff. And nonfiction generally tends to be about researching stuff and figuring out, how you're going to organize all this information. But then you got to go to the writing. Writing is, well, the author banging on the keyboard, staring out the window, or doing a lot of cursing at the screen. And eventually you get finished with it, and then you face the problem of publishing. Okay, so you get published, and that's one of the big decisions that you have to make is how are you going to do it? You're going to go for an agent, and there are also a lot of publishing companies that don't require an agent. You can go to them directly. They're legitimate stuff, or you can self-publish. In which case, something that's confusing about self-publishing to a lot of people: when you self-publish, you, the author, are the publisher. You get to do all the work the publishers would do if you sold the book to a publisher. You get to do all of it. You have to get a cover. You have to get it edited. You have to format the book. You have to design the book, all of this stuff. It takes months to do all of these things. And then da-da, and people say, okay, I got the book finished, it's published. Now I start marketing. Wrong. You got to start marketing before the book is launched. Actually, some of the stuff you do with getting it published is marketing. Like you have to create a landing page for your book, and when you upload it to, excuse me, Kindle, you have to do a lot of the work for the landing page, and the landing page is essential because when you sell a book, you don't sell it on the internet or rather social media. You sell it at the landing page. The landing page is what convinces the reader to buy the book or to go someplace else.
What is the equivalent of the landing page? Because it sounds like this is a web-based landing page. What's the equivalent prior to the internet? What was used in place thereof?
The old-fashioned way, you went to a bookstore and you looked at the cover.
Okay.
Now it's a landing page is, well, think Amazon. Just go to Amazon page and look at a book.
Mm-hmm.
That's the landing page. That's what sells books, the landing page on Amazon or Barnes and Noble websites or these other websites. But so you got to start publishing it. And, you got pre-launch marketing and you got post-launch marketing, and they're okay. So when you're marketing the book, you really have to think about it in terms of business because you own a business. You're the CEO of an author of a business, and you got to think about, because royalties are taxable income.
Mm.
A lot of authors don't realize that until they start to sell books. The other thing is, in many states, if you go to, let's say, a book fair, you hold a book fair someplace and you sell copies of your book. In many cases, you owe sales tax to the state government. As another nasty implication of selling, and the business implication. You got to consider this stuff. You have to really should decide whether you have a sole proprietorship company or a limited liability corporation, and get the papers that says these things so that the IRS believes you when you tell the IRS, I'm really out of business and I'm allowed to deduct this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, all of this stuff is interrelated, and it's part of the complexity of publishing a book or writing a book, creating a book.
Have you found some folks that, because I'm sure you have spoken about this in front of large groups of people as well as individuals, that when they find out just how complicated, because there is a certain level of complexity here, they decide, nah, I'll just write it down and I won't even bother to publish it because it's not only is it too much work, I don't know anything about these aspects of marketing and so forth. Have you run into that as well? And what do you
Sort of.
tell them?
Yeah, I know a guy who's in a write group with me. He's written about 14 books he's published. He self-publishes them. He has no interest in marketing the books. All he does is he writes the books. He gets someone to make a cover, self-publishes it, goes on to the next one. Couldn't care less if he sells any books. He just got this big bookshelf in his apartment, where he's got all of these books. That's all he cares about. He doesn't care if he sells it. Doesn't care if anybody reads it.
That's kind of,
My way of thinking.
well, the only thing I can think of is that he'll have an interesting legacy to leave behind. And someone is going to want to take a look at those and say, hey, these are really good. I don't know why he didn't publish them while he was alive. So we'll publish them now.
Oh, they're published. You can buy them. They're on Amazon.
Yeah.
But his landing page is a piece of crap. Nobody's going to finish. Nobody's going to stay on that landing page more than 5 seconds.
Yeah. So now you've written and published what, over 30 books, if I'm correct.
About that, yeah.
Yeah.
After a while, you don't bother with the count.
Yeah. Do you consider yourself real prolific in terms of like when did you start writing the first one and then of course subsequently one right after the other?
Well, I started with short stories.
Mm-hmm.
I sold and published about 45 short stories. I started doing that way back in the last century, long time ago. So then I my short stories have gradually started getting longer and longer, and they morphed into novels. But what was the question again?
In term, first of all, when did you start writing? When did that bug bite you?
When I was 50 years old, at the time I was a sales manager for a large corporation in Midtown Manhattan. And 50 years old, I had a couple of beers, and I said, I need another career. It was only a matter of time to like tap me on the shoulder and tell me, take a hike. We want your office for a young kid. So I said, well, I'm not going to do the same stuff. I'm going to do something different. And I always enjoyed writing. So I said, I'm going to write fiction. So commuting into New York on a bus, I started writing. The fact that I did nothing about writing fiction didn't slow me down at all. But that's when I started. And that was in the last century. So in about 6 or 7 years after that, that company offered a big retirement package. In my case, it was quite lucrative. So I took the money and ran. Never looked back.
Mm. I gather that when you made that decision, you felt what? Felt free because you weren't encumbered. I mean, an author is their own boss.
Yes.
Whereas before that, you had to answer to somebody else.
Yeah. It's a question of you have freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Really, you have freedom to do what you want when you want to do it. Um, I'm free to write whenever I want to write. And I generally write every morning. I love writing, so I write or run a business. I got a business, author business, and I spend a couple of days, a couple of mornings a week on business issues, and the rest of them is on the other rest of the week. The week is writing,
Mm.
mostly most of the morning.
Is there any particular place where you get inspiration? I know that on this program we talk about encouraging people to spend some time during what I've dubbed the decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, spending time going within, spending time quietly, maybe meditating. Or is that something that you do, or do the ideas just come and then you start writing?
Well, the ideas come, and I spent some time. I guess it's being creative, or maybe it's meditating, and there may be different terms for it. But um, it's kind of like just connect my mind and let it just free run.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no restraints,
No
and do it
restrict.
wherever it wants. Think about whatever it wants, and eventually, some of the stuff I go, whoa, that's it. I was back up here. I want to write that one down, and that's generally, it's just let your mind freewheel. Don't put any restraints on it. Just go anywhere and can think about anything. I love doing that.
Would you consider that to be what some people have termed stream of consciousness writing?
No, it isn't.
No.
Because just write down an idea, get story ideas. But I don't. It's just to get ideas.
Mm-hmm.
End of it, once I get the idea, then I start developing the idea. But I don't think it's stream of consciousness.
Mm.
I've never written stream of consciousness stuff. I don't read it either.
When you were in school, grade school, high school, and even college, at that time, did writing appeal to you?
Yeah, I was always good at it. That was one of my best classes was English writing. And in high school, my English teacher kind of urged me to go to take journalism. I said, screw that, I want to be an engineer. So, so I went to engineering school. And when you get in engineering school, you do not have time to write.
Yeah.
You have time to solve problems, nothing else.
I know that for me, when I went to junior college following 6 months off after graduating from high school, I decided I was going to take, English 101
Uh-huh.
just to fine tune things. And the first day they announced that you will be writing 5 essays. Scared the daylights out of me. But once I learned the formula, so to speak, those 5 essays they just came naturally. It was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same with writing stories. I mean, It comes quite naturally to me. It didn't at first, but after you get the hang of it and you figure out, what the process is, you got to come up with a process on how to do it in an orderly fashion. But once it get going, it's fine.
Yeah.
I just write scenes, completely out of order, put them in order later on, figure out where they go.
How closely related, and because I don't know whether you've done this or not, but how closely related do you think writing of a novel, fiction,
Mhm.
and say writing a screenplay for television or movies might be? Because it seems like you'd still have to have a lot of the elements that would be in your novel, even in the screenplay.
The only difference between the two is what the output looks like. A novel is a book. A
Hmm.
screenplay it's formatted completely different, but they go through the same process. You need
Hmm.
characters, you need emotions, you need scenes, you need all of the stuff. It's the same thing, same process. Writing a novel and writing a screenplay is just that they just format it differently. They have different requirements. With a screenplay, um, you can't have a lot of internal monologue because that's no such thing. That's can't do that. And it's all the screenplay is all dialogue,
Yeah.
essentially. Novel, got some exposition scattered around, but the development process is pretty much the same.
Hank Quense is my guest. Creating your first novel is the book that we're talking about, the subject matter of our conversation here today, here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I find this fascinating, Hank, because obviously, first of all, I'd like to finish this short little self-help book I've been holding on to for 22 years. But I've also taken the perspective, as has been shared with me as well. The book will come out when it's time. What is your thought in terms of, have you had not just ideas, but have you had books that took longer than you thought maybe they should? I should have finished this by now. Or is yours also, it'll come out when the universe says it's time for it to come out?
No, I never really had a problem. I just write it when it's done, it's done. But I think I do have run across some writers who have a problem that they don't want to release the book. They just keep editing and revising, and after a point, you reach a point where you're not improving the book, you're disapproving the book. You know,
Mm,
uh, and I think people just it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, fear. They got over the fear of writing and they wrote the book, and now they're really afraid to let it out into the wild. They said, "Oh my God, is this going to survive in the wild? Is it going to die as soon as they get rid of it?" And they were really afraid to release the book. They
mm,
keep they keep constantly working on it and reworking it. That's their excuse not to let it go because all it's not
yeah.
quite finished. Uh, I'm not to imply that this is your case, but I do know authors who have that problem. Or writers. They're not authors yet; they're writers, but
Yeah.
they never finish the book because they have a fear of letting it go.
What about the one group of people I made reference to them earlier? What about critics? Do you care? Does it have any impact on you at all?
Nope.
What about critics?
Oh, I love to get good reviews,
Well, sure.
but whether it's a 5-star review on Amazon or it's a 1-star review, the only thing I say, thank you for reading the book.
Hmm.
If someone says one star, I don't argue with them. I say, thank you for reading my book. If it's 5 stars, thank you for reading my book.
Yeah.
Do not argue with the critics.
Yeah.
But
Because
I don't pay attention to them either because there's for every 1 star I get, I get 4 or 5 5-star ones. So 1 star kind of makes it that not everyone likes my books. I get that. Not everyone will like it. Not everyone will like what I write. So that's life.
so you're pretty pragmatic about the work that you put out. That hey, there, like you just said, there's some that are going to like it, some that aren't, and that's fine because
Yeah,
that's what makes the world go round.
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't write it for everybody. Actually, I wrote it for myself.
right.
Someone wants to read it and like it. Hey, go for it.
Are you connected with or attend different groups?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier this one writing group that you referenced. Are you part of these kinds of groups as well, or are you pretty much solo in your life?
Um, well, I'm kind of solo, but I do belong to some write groups, a couple of writing groups. I was on a Zoom meeting for over an hour this morning with one of those write groups. They have a meeting every weekend, every uh, every Tuesday. It used to be in person, which was a lot of fun, but now it's Zoom since the COVID. Now we
Yeah.
have Zoom, and um, Zoom is not that interesting. The in-person meetings were a lot of fun. I really enjoyed them. The Zoom meetings are not that much fun.
Well, I
But I do
myself,
go to Zoom, and I do converse with people, and trade emails and stuff. The people from these right groups.
well, I'm grateful for Zoom or the programs similar that allow me to have an opportunity to speak with folks like yourself, Hank.
Oh, these are
I
great.
prefer.
But
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
stuff like this is great, but getting 10 or 12 people together, it's not as good as being in person.
Yeah.
Nothing close to it.
Well, I prefer people in person in studio to interview, and I loved it. This was prior to 2020, but I'm talking with people all over the world, which is
Yeah,
just incredible.
you're not geographically limited anymore.
Yeah. And it's kind of nice because
Yeah,
it's nice to get to know other people in other parts of the world,
yeah,
often asking, what kind of challenges are you dealing with in your part of the world? That kind of thing.
yeah,
Do you consider yourself to be an optimist? And is that reflected in your work?
yeah. I think so. Yeah, my novels all have happy endings. Someone wins,
Hmm.
and it's yeah. I think optimistic is good. I'm an optimistic writer. I write humor too, so that makes kind of happy.
You write humor.
Yeah, humor and satire. All my novels are humorous and or satiric.
Oh, very cool. I love that. As a kid growing up, I loved the satire of Mad Magazine in particular. A little different kind of writing, but nonetheless.
Yeah,
And others who love to poke fun through
yeah,
satire at different circumstances that we face in our lives
yes,
that shows kind of how silly we are as
yeah,
human beings.
yes. Gotta have people poking sticks at all these serious people.
Yeah, yeah. Is there a particular genre that you like? I mean, again, I know it's fiction, and so forth, but is there a particular area?
Yeah, fantasy and sci-fi.
So I'm sure you've possibly have read Stranger in a Strange Land and
I
Dune.
did, I did read it. Heinlein. I loved Heinlein. He's a very good writer, but I don't particularly remember the book, but I know I've read a lot of Heinlein. And about a year or two ago, maybe about a year and a half ago, my niece gave me a copy of Dune. No, about this thick, all
I,
5 novels or something. I read them all before, a long time ago. I
yeah,
just I just read that one in a month, all 5 novels.
yeah.
So
I remember a paperback, and
yeah,
and 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 as a kid growing up, being legally blind, I had to use a magnifying glass, and I'm
hmm
holding this rather thick, probably inch and a half to 2 inch thick paperback. The book was entitled The Prometheus Project. It was also by Frank Herbert. And I was up until 2 and 3 in the morning sometimes. It was so intriguing to me. Um, do you find are there books that you pick up in your regular reading, not so much the writing, reading that they just grab you and you just say, "Oh, I don't care if if I'm supposed to go to sleep or I got to eat. I got to finish this."
yeah, it happens. Yes,
Yeah.
it usually happens with books by Bernard Cornwell. He's an English author. He writes mostly about warriors, and combat. It's historical fiction. I get a new book from him I just, I, I don't care. I stop doing everything and just read the book till I'm
Yeah.
finished. And then I go, damn, now what am I going to do? I finished the book.
Now you have to wait for him to write another one.
No, it's going to be another year before he writes another book.
Yeah. It's just extraordinary. Until I finished Stranger in a Strange Land, um, I really felt like, boy, I am so deficient in the classics.
Yeah.
And there are still a lot of books I have not read that most people have read.
Mhm.
But I've read other books more along the lines of what we talk about on this program. But at the same time, there are so many books out there. It's like, when I'm going to have to come back in another lifetime
Oh,
and just read the writings and get and glean from their concepts, their ideas, their imagination.
yeah, you can never finish reading. You never catch up. You
Yeah.
read the book and another 10 are published. Uh,
And I'm curious as to, because this happens in the music industry, and I find this perplexing, in my opinion, that people will sue one another because they used a riff from their song.
yeah,
And it's like, well, wait a minute. You'd think that would be the height of flattery. They didn't steal it. They were influenced by you. And then when you hear the interviews by these different artists, oh, yeah, my influences were thus and such and thus and so on and so on and so on. And that's why, I like doing this kind of music and so forth.
yeah,
Is that, do you, and again, I'm not talking about here plagiarism by any means,
yeah.
but what about that kind of influence? After you've read one of these books that you read and it's like, oh, now I got to wait another year before I get another one. Does that ever influence you in terms of sparking an idea in your own mind and imagination?
There's two books I know that I read that influenced my writing. I kind of tailored my writing to them. One is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's kind of like the first really crazy sci-fi book.
Hmm.
Before that, sci-fi was always very serious stuff.
Yeah.
This Douglas just blew the lid off that, and made it into comedy. And the other book that I really loved is Catch 22. Is probably the best book on satire I've ever read. And it's, those two have very strongly influenced my writing. I kind
Mm.
of tailor my writing towards the way they view the world and the writing.
Can you share with us your personal, shall we say, life's philosophy? What words do you live by? What concepts, ideas, etc., do you live by?
Ah, okay. Well, I think the greatest thing you can do in your life is to find someone wonderful and grow old together. My wife and I did that, but I lost her last Christmas,
Mm,
but 57 years. I think that's I think that is the most important thing you can do in your world, in your life. Grow
mm.
old with someone wonderful.
Well, I know that my mother and father did that. My father passed away just this past March, and almost made it to 62. Was that right? 62 years of marriage. He almost made it to 92 as well.
Yeah,
And it's just amazing how my mother, despite her missing him terribly, she's still the same strong woman. And they had a level of commitment best epitomized by what she said to me. I had the privilege of interviewing them in 2015. And she said, I have his back and I know he has mine.
yeah,
And I thought, wow, that's what I call commitment and connectedness, if you will, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Wow,
Yeah, it's a great thing.
it
I
really
don't think
is.
there's anything better in life.
Well, I'm working to foster all of that within my relationship with my present wife.
Mhm.
And and still have a great time doing the things that I'm doing, like talking with you, Hank Quense, author of Creating Your First Novel, as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and we're talking with Hank Quense, and I want to, first of all, thank you so much for the time that you have given us here on the program.
Right.
It's been
Whoops.
very insightful. Um, I need to literally sit down, pull the file, and start going through it and get it finished so that I can either pass it on to an editor or go through it again, with I don't know, fresh eyes or something. Maybe I'll send it to my sister again and see what she has to say. Um, I want to thank you so much for giving us the time here on the program. I really appreciate the insights that you have given, and I'm going to get started trying to, no, not trying to. I'm going to finish the book. I don't know that I'll finish it before the end of 2023, but 2024 feels, I don't know, it
Yeah.
feels right.
Yeah. Hey, it's been great being here, Rich. I really liked and enjoyed talking to you.
Well, thank you. I do have three final questions for you that I ask all of my guests at the end of the program. But before I do, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m. and 9 a.m. on Wednesdays. And during the month of December, we are here from 8 to 9 a.m. Monday through Friday. That's right. We've got an extra 5 programs that we'll be bringing your way every week during the month of December. And also, we are podcasting on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. And we're also on YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope you will subscribe and at least click notification so that the next time I post a conversation, you will be notified and you'll be able to listen in on said conversation. Also, ask that if you can support the work that we are doing with this program financially, we have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. Just use the email address richard@richarddugan.com when they ask, to whom are you sending this? richard@richarddugan.com. And finally, we ask that you take time during this, the Decade of Perfect Vision, to go within and listen to that still small voice for inspiration and encouragement and guidance, a little education, or just some quiet time. And with all of that being said, again, my thanks to my guest. First question that I have for you of those three is, who is Hank Quense?
Who is Hank Quense? I'm just an old guy who likes to write.
What is your life's purpose?
To enjoy my grandkids and to try and teach them and take them places that they'll never forget, and places they probably wouldn't go on their own until many years from now. Last August, I took them all to Barcelona.
Oh, wow.
The year
Well,
before that, I took them all to Dublin.
and finally, what was your best day?
My best day. I think it's the day I got married.
Mm,
Actually, it was 1 year, 1966. I got married in January, and I graduated from college in May. That was a really good year.
mm. Well, once again, Hank, thank you so much for your time and sharing your story with us here. And I hope that folks will take your advice, get a copy of your book. Will be linked to your website. And we look forward to maybe having a chance to talk to you again when your next book comes out.
I'd love to be back. This is fun. I really enjoyed this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. Once again, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast. Love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening.
Okay.
Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I will see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.